Hey everyone, it's Aaron with Do Good Work. We've been getting a lot of requests from you guys asking us, how do we take on a rebrand project? So recently we were asked to do a lecture at Art Center. It's a design school here in Pasadena. And so we were given the opportunity to share our process and provide insight on how we take on rebrand projects. So one of the projects we did recently is for a client here in Los Angeles. It's a beverage company, and we were approached by them to do a rebrand of their packaging, and this is what it looks like. It's called Better Booch. This is the bottle. That is the can. And so we were tasked to not only rebrand their packaging, but to repackage it as well. So in today's lecture at Art Center, we're gonna be sharing the sort of A to the Z, how do we think high-level process of taking this brand into the next step. So come join us.
I'd like to introduce Aaron. So Aaron, how you going?
I want to thank everyone for coming. It's awesome to be here. So we are a team of 8 designers and strategists, and we do a lot of branding systems. And when I first started the business in my home office, it was primarily crafting sort of logos and websites, and it was really just a lot of pretty pictures. And so I didn't have any strategy behind what I was doing. It was just purely aesthetic. And so what I later realized is I was not serving my clients well. I was just providing them pretty pictures. Well, when they say that design without concept is just art, and that's kind of what I was giving them, it didn't really help them and sort of move that needle and connect with their consumers. So when I started to learn this and become more sophisticated with my approach to design, I think that's when the needle moved with the business. I started getting more sort of high-value clients because I became more sophisticated and I was bringing more high value to what I was doing as a designer. There's a saying that says, people don't buy products, they buy feelings. People don't buy products, they buy feelings. Because oftentimes when you buy something, if you think about it, there's a utility side to the product that you are considering purchasing, but oftentimes you're going to lean to the product that has an emotional connection to you, something that is memorable, that's something that sparks an emotion, and that's something that we need to be very mindful of as we create something. There's 2 sides. There's a rational mind and there's an emotional mind, and this is sort of the sort of philosophy we take when we approach every design project. The rational mind is the logic, the statistics, the fact side of why someone would purchase something. It normally solves a problem. It's a utility side of it. On the other side, and I think this is where we lean more heavily on, and it's the emotional side. I think Marty Neumeier says that branding is a gut feeling. And it's what they say it is and not what you say it is. And I think that is really sparked by what their emotions are, that sort of visceral level of branding. And so we want to focus on both spheres, and in the middle there's that secret sauce. So to prove my point, I'm just curious, does anyone have any idea what this is? I heard some answers. On top, that is what is called a SCOBY. And yes, I had no idea what that was when I first saw it. My wife was making SCOBY, which is an acronym for a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And my wife had a canister or a jar on our kitchen counter, and she was making what is known as kombucha. And that's a living organism that when it ferments with tea, it creates this unique sort of fermented flavor, and the longer you ferment it, it starts to get some sweetness out of it. So I bring this up because I think without considering the emotional side to branding and how consumers shop and their habits, you probably would be very ineffective in being able to sell a product like this to a consumer. Which leads me to a project, and I want to walk you guys through a case study of a client that we got maybe about 7-8 months ago. They are called Better Booch. They're an existing brand. They've been on the market for about 6 years. They are SoCal based. I think they're located here in Silver Lake. They approached us because they had some problems. And I say that because when I got into the creative field, I thought it was all about designing. And as I've gotten older and more mature and have started to work with more clients, what I realize is design is about problem solving. Clients will come to us because they have a problem, and it's our job to solve it. And so that was the case with this couple, Trey and Ashley. They started out as musicians. Ashley was a very respected singer. She's sung with the likes of Rihanna and Justin Bieber's girlfriend. I can't remember, Selena? Was that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not a millennial, but I'm still trying to keep in touch. And then Trey, he was also in the music industry, and that's how they met. He was a writer. He also played instruments. And I'm telling you this story because one thing I like about working with entrepreneurs or startup companies is when you work with them, they are really an extension of that brand. And so when we're working with them, I want to be as intimate and knowledgeable and create as much insight on who they are, because oftentimes their DNA is sort of in the brand itself, and that's oftentimes why they created that brand to begin with, because it was something that was really meaningful to them. In this case, Trey, his sister was undiagnosed with cancer, and she started to drink kombucha because it had a lot of health benefits. It had sort of like gut healing has like 1 billion probiotics. And so Trey became interested, and then he started brewing kombucha as well. And then Ashley, she actually grew, or her job in college was working at a tea house. So they both had interest in tea, and so they started making kombucha. I mean, it's very common to a lot of entrepreneurs is they sort of create this proof of concept and they get it off the ground, and they just don't quite know what to do with it. They oftentimes, a lot of their branding is very reactive, and it's oftentimes done by their neighbor or their cousin or someone who knows someone who can design. And so that's where they approached us, and I'm going to walk you through this, how we rebranded Better Booch, and our process on how we do that. Bahia mentioned it, and I think as she evolved as well, she started to realize that design shouldn't necessarily be about a competition, and it should be rooted in strategy, because I believe all of your moves should be predicated on why you're making the certain creative moves that you're making to address the needs of the brand, your client, as well as the habits and the needs of the consumer. And so to sort of understand and capture those insights, you have to do some research and strategy. And so what we do is we don't have a boilerplate template. We don't just plug and play, because of my 20 years of working in the industry, there have never been one client that's exactly like another. And so every project we come in, we're very organic. We're incredibly fluid with our client to understand and get deep down in knowing the truths about their businesses and their flaws. There's only one rule that we have when we're doing research and strategy, and we want to address these 4 questions. Everything else is fluid. And so we want to address who are you, that's from the client side. Who needs to know, that is the consumer. How will they find out? And lastly, why they should care. Designers are like great therapists. The client has all the answers. They just don't know it. We just need to ask the right questions to extract it from them. So we don't do any sort of market research. Occasionally we'll do some Google. Why not? It's there. But normally the client has all the answers. High level, we want to address the 4 main pillars. And so the who are you, we obviously want to understand who the client, what their values are, what they stand for, and we normally do these sort of brand platform studies with them. In this case, they already had packaging. It was a rebrand, so we wanted to learn what their strengths and weaknesses were, what their successes and failures were. We want to be real with them, and I think it's super important to get to the truth. On the other side of the coin, and I think it's even more important, and we take a consumer-centric point of view when we do branding, because I believe it's what the consumers say the brand is. So we want to understand their habits and their needs and why they would consider this product. We like to do these sort of personas, which is really important. It's sort of the empathy aspect of trying to understand who the consumer is super important. As you start to mature as designers, as you start to mature as individuals, it's important to be curious and to constantly experience new things. Like I say travel, I say try as many different types of foods as possible. Challenge each other. And I think through that, you through life experiences, allows you to understand different facets of how other people think. How will they find out? I think it's really important because it really guides how we deliver the message to the consumer, how we want to speak and address the values, the emotional side of the brand, because it's very different from an e-commerce sort of experience, a digital versus something if you're pushing a shopping cart down a grocery store and you have this 5-foot sort of 2-second rule where you have to be able to capture their attention in a nanosecond. And lastly, we want to address the why should they care. That's the meaningful thing. It's like what makes you stand out. And so once we start to address these things, we normally do a few rounds with them, and then we get them to sign off on the research and strategy deck. And it really acts as our roadmap for everyone to move forward and make sure that we all sort of stay in our lanes and that we're all informed. And so when we are presenting throughout the process is that it keeps everyone on the same page, and it doesn't allow anyone to sort of veer away just because they have some sort of shiny object syndrome. So there's a lot of things that we learned from this, and we learned a lot of things that were working well with their current packaging, a lot of things that they had some misses. Some of the key things is it's kombucha, but it's really difficult to find. In fact, the smallest type on there is how it's trying to identify what the product, what is inside the bottle, because consumers want to have expectations on what they're about to try. So it wasn't very clear. They were very sort of product forward, flavor forward, and so oftentimes they were kind of abstract, so you really didn't know what was inside the bottle. Some things that we did learn is that consumers love the product. Some of the things, some of the equitable things that they found is they love the sort of illustration style because I think it captured a certain whimsy. And if you look at the illustration closely, there's surfers, there's the Capitol Records building. So it's rooted in a lot of sort of its origin story. So we wanted to have these things and keep it in our back pocket as we get ready to create. Well, in the kombucha space, a lot of brands, they either do small batch, where they do the fermenting in these little 2-gallon jugs. And then a lot of other companies do like this much larger scale craft brewing. Trey and Ashley communicated to us that they found this sort of sweet spot where there's a smaller system that worked well for them that allowed them to capture the flavor profile. So it was somewhere in between. And so we coined this term called small craft. And so they wanted to be a premium kombucha, so we sort of identified them as a premium small craft kombucha company. We wanted to start to dive into the creative, and we want to start to scratch the surface. She provided this quote for us, and it's by Albert Einstein. It reads, "The definition of genius is taking something complex and making it simple." So understanding her sensibilities and the aesthetic that she finds it pleasing was really important. So oftentimes we will ask clients if they have a certain aesthetic that they like, we're just going to ask them, and we want to see where they are. And so oftentimes Pinterest works really well. Sometimes our clients don't have a creative bone in their body, and that's okay. They just want us to come up with it. But it's interesting, or it's important for us if they do have a notion of where it wants to go, we want to ask that up front. I'm not saying that we're going to take it as gospel. We're going to poke holes in it, and we're going to challenge them if we don't think it fits with the brand. What we started to identify is there's an aesthetic that she was attracted to, and I think a lot of it was rooted from where they live. They live in Silver Lake, California, and for those of you who know the area, it's very artsy. It has this sort of, this SoCal sort of chic. It's minimalist, and so we understood that, and we wanted to break down a lot of the references that they had from the Pinterest board, and so we started applying words to it to sort of understand why she chose them rather than them just being pretty pictures. And so we started applying words like, is it color palette, is it the vibe, is it the illustration style, why we are here and what we've accomplished and why we made the decisions that we made. So what we do is we do an abridged version of the research and strategy deck. So I mentioned this research and strategy deck on this was 120 pages. We sort of broke it down and we gave them a sort of an abridged version. I think it was about 10 pages. And really what it does is it sets the stage for them and sort of lets them recalibrate on what they're about to see, and it reminds them how we got here. It's also creating these breadcrumbs of ideas, so when we actually show the concepts, then they can sort of follow along. It's sort of this runway that we're creating for everyone. So this is sort of what it looks like. We readdress some of the challenges. We remind them this is the sort of space that we want to occupy, some key sort of words that sort of help shape where we're at. Through that, we broke it down into 4 categories, and I call them buckets. And what I oftentimes see with young creatives is they start designing and they get into a space and they're digging one hole. And they keep digging down on a hole, and all their concepts look very similar. And I say, like, if you're trying to find a solution by digging down one hole and you can't find it, digging deeper is not going to get you there. So I encourage you to dig another hole. So iterate and prototype. I want you to dig a bunch of holes. And so with the research and strategy, we have a narrowed focus on where we can dig those holes, and we want to hit both ends of those spectrums so that we can share all the possibilities with our client. So this is the first concept, and again, we want to apply words. We want to create a description. We don't like to number them numerically. We like to sort of give them a name, so it sort of gets them in a mindset and a space on what they're about to see. In this case, we call it a Booch evolution. This is something that was really close to their existing brand, and here's some of the inspiration that got us there. Our boards look something like this. Typically, they're on a white background. But in this case, they wanted something that was very Instagrammable. They wanted a brand that could really speak to millennials, and it was really important to them. So for us, we wanted to put our concepts and presentation in that context so they can look at it through that lens. So we kind of, instead of putting a white background, we gave it a look that is something like you might find on their Instagram feed. We also started to apply some brand voice to sort of create some facets for the brand. And of course, it's really important to show shelf sets so you can see how that brand lives on the shelf, how it stands out or may not stand out next to the competitors. So we did this, I think we did 8 concepts for them. Typically, we want to be in a range of 3 or 6. One of my designers, we went to Austin recently for an event called First Round, and there's some really large studios and they just do one concept. And that like blew my mind. It's like, you're just gonna present one concept? It's like, that is like jumping out of a plane without a parachute to me. And the 2 of the designers that presented their work, different studios, one, it worked, and the other one, the client didn't like it. So I always fear, I don't wanna be that where it's like I don't have a safety net. So we presented 8, I'm gonna only show you 6. And so we wanna show a bunch of concepts, and we wanna give it context. Also, it's like, how do you make talking about microbiotic sexy? And so we were trying to come up with something that was very unique and fun and artistic, and this is what we came up with. We will then show a sort of like a snapshot of all the concepts. They were kind of leaning between number 6 and 3. They ultimately chose number 3, and so that was a sort of where we started to go into the 4th stage, which is a refinement stage. We start to go into some of the details. One of the key things is they were concerned about how Better Booch, it might be a little challenging to read in this sort of what we call this logo A, which is sort of a yin-yang style. And so they wanted to see, like, what if it were right reading? We felt like it was losing something, and so we wanted to reinforce why we felt like that was working better. And so we present these sort of inspiration boards and sort of rationale behind what we do or why we do what we do. And so they agreed, and so we stuck with Better Booch. I also like the way the B's sort of counterbalance each other. The other thing that came up is like, what if there was an icon? So we started exploring like where maybe what an icon can be and where it could live. we went back again to the research deck, and we started to see this pattern, and there was this we call a triad. They kept talking in threes. The brand values, they were cultivate, create, and cure, and there was holistic attributes like spirit, mind, and body. There's also this sort of the California spirit, and so we came up with this mark here, which embodies all of those things. Another component is one of the really equitable parts of their previous packaging was the illustration style. So I felt it was something that was really important to have that sort of legacy. And so we started looking for illustrators. We found this illustrator's name is Chris De Lorenzo. We liked his sort of whimsical style. We broke it down into three potential options: a lifestyle forward, a flavor forward, or a mindset forward. We ended up going with the lifestyle forward option with the illustrations. So this brings me to a quote by Nicholas Negroponte. He says, "Where do new ideas come from? The answer is simple: differences. Creativity comes from unlikely juxtapositions." So someone who really inspires me on a day-to-day basis is my wife, and she suffers from a disease that probably a lot of you have, and that's FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. And so this is goat yoga, and she seems to always have her finger on the pulse of like, what is the latest silly thing? And so this inspired me, and we presented concepts for them, and we came up with this illustration. And so I love the juxtaposition, the evolution of this sort of outdoor lifestyle, the mountains with this hierarchy. And the reason why goats jump on your back is because they always want to be in the highest place. Another inspiration for us is, because it's a Southern California company, we really wanted to embrace that. Is a big part of Los Angeles sort of DNA is this Chicano culture, and so we wanted to be inspired by this and do a contrast where we created sort of mixing the hard and the soft, the sort of the feminine with the masculine. And because Ashley and Trey come from the music industry, and like I mentioned, they're part of the DNA of the brand, that Coachella was obviously something that stood out, and so Joshua Tree. So we came up with this concept, which we call Love Hurts. And so what we did is we put it on the back of it because we wanted the minimalist approach and look and feel. And so we put the illustrations on the backside of the packaging. It's sort of like an Easter egg that you find and you cherish when you see it. We also wanted to craft copy that sort of spoke to what the brand values were and expectations and what the flavor profile, as well as sort of creating a nod to that illustration that's accompanying it. Once we sort of dial everything in, then we go into production stage where we sort of flesh everything out and really start to apply it into marketing channels. And currently right now we're just building their website. So they're doing cans and bottles. We wanted to make it a brand that people can relate to and feel comfortable, and it's sort of that's something familiar, so familiar with Southern California. A marketing van. And so they were just released the product a little less than a month ago at Expo West, which is the big natural food show in Anaheim, and the Die Line picked it up. They saw it, and they picked it up as one of the top 9 new brands at the show. So you gotta celebrate. You gotta celebrate wins. It's super important. Hope you guys enjoyed that lecture at Art Center. I really enjoyed sharing our process on how we approach a rebrand project. I think the focus is to put your attention on the foundation. The process is super key in finding that solution at the end. And being able to take a project like this and identifying where you can find the opportunities to take it into a place like this. So it's all, again, rooted in the process. In future episodes, we're going to break down every level of our process and go a little more granular, a little more technical, so you guys can get more of the minutia on how we do it. So stay tuned for more episodes. As always, we want you guys to be part of our tribe, so hit the subscribe button. If you like the episode, hit like, and always provide some content below in the comment box for future episodes. And remember, life is better when you do good work.